Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Monday, October 21st. The field is set. It will be Yankees, Dodgers in the World Series. We're going to talk about how we got there. Some pretty exciting developments, especially in the ALCS. Even though it was only a 5-game series, it had plenty of drama. We'll break that down, as well as the weekend happenings on the NLCS side, where for a moment, it looked like the Mets were going to do their punch back thing until they were sent home for good on Sunday night by the Dodgers. We'll talk about MVPs in each series, some of the trends we've seen in this postseason. We'll say goodbye to the 2024 Mets and 2024 Guardians, officially look ahead to what's next for those clubs in the offseason. We're going to have a full preview of the Yankees-Dodgers series later this week in the feed. So if this is less future-focused on the World Series, that is why. Eno, how was your weekend?
It was good. It was good. Went out on the town, saw a movie, saw a little bit of music, saw some baseball, some Little League baseball. Fall ball season is in full swing, so it was a good weekend.
I have a question for you. Have you taken your children to the pumpkin farm at some point in their lives?
I have. We usually have a school-related pumpkin farm festival thingy.
It's a little further away to get to a pumpkin farm where you are. It takes a little more effort to get there. For me, I just got to go about 10 minutes, 15 minutes, any direction outside the city, and I'm surrounded by pumpkin farms. But
there's an art to timing it, right?
As long as you go to one that has a lot of activities, I think you could even go on a busy day. I learned that this weekend. And my fear as a parent was that we'd go on a Saturday afternoon, 70-degree, beautiful Saturday afternoon in October, which is rare in the Midwest. When you get them, they're amazing. And I thought the pumpkin farm is going to be a disaster. And I was wrong. There's one very close to where I live, and it was phenomenal because they had 2 corn mazes. They had their tractor rides. They had an apple cannon. They had a place where you could get your pumpkins. They had food trucks. They had stuff for kids to play with. They had a beer garden.
Wow.
How many pumpkin farms have you been to that have an actual beer garden set up? So the acreage on this was impressive. The usage was phenomenal. They had a bunch of photo spaces already set up with selfie sticks. So we pulled in, and I was like, oh, yeah, this is kind of as busy as I thought it would be. Then we walked in and kind of went to a spot, and we're like, this is amazing. It's like we have a little corner to ourselves, even though there's a lot of people here. So awesome experience overall.
Wow. And I was saying about the timing of pumpkin carving, because there's always you do the early one, and then you're like, oh, this is nasty. I have to throw this away. It's only like October 25th. So you have to have the ones that you don't carve that you leave for later. You can,
Yeah.
It was more of a thing when they were younger, and I could get an hour of time out of the children. Just go carve these things.
Yeah, we're not at the carving stage yet, but I just wondered if the beer garden was a thing that had made its way to California, or if that's really just a Wisconsin or a Midwest thing to have an actual beer garden set up.
I bet you there is one. Now that you say that, I think maybe the kids and I will have to find our way to one this weekend.
It's brilliant. Hopefully next year we can do a live show at the pumpkin garden I went to this year. The beer garden I went to this year at the Pumpkin Festival. But lots of ground to cover today. Join our Discord if you haven't done so already. The link for that is in the show description. Let's start with the series that ended more recently, the Dodgers dispatching of the Mets in 6 games. That series did make it back to LA, and it got there because the Mets offense unloaded again in game 5. And one of the strange things about this series was just that the games were all pretty lopsided, and that didn't make for the most tense moments throughout the series. Like there was occasional drama. I mean, in game 6, there was a chance for Jesse Winker to take one swing and put the Mets in the lead against Evan Phillips in the 6th inning. It didn't happen, but I think for as big as a Dodgers-Mets series might be in the future, this one, because of the way the games flowed, just didn't land the way that it could have, even though the teams involved were loaded with entertaining players.
Yeah. I think that the sort of parade of relievers was part of it in terms of both having lopsided outcomes and, maybe some tepid interest nationally. I don't know. I would say that the Dodgers, who got 3 2/3 innings out of their starters on average this postseason, third least in the playoffs. that they've used that to their advantage. And of course, that's why to some extent there are lopsided victories, because you use your A bullpen and your B bullpen. And that's sort of what they've done. I mean, it's kind of what we saw a little bit out of the Rangers last year when they didn't have enough starters and relievers to really try to stay competitive every game. And I think generally that's been the theme of this postseason, is just like how difficult it is to keep a pitching staff healthy and productive this far into the season. But both teams got just enough pitching in the games that they won. And I think the big difference offensively was, the Mets had a 361 OBP in this series, and the Dodgers had an amazing 395. But is a bigger difference when it comes to slugging. 379 slugging for the Mets, 459 for the Dodgers. That's 11 homers for the Dodgers, 5 homers for the Mets. Literally, the way into this conversation, the way you talked about that Winker moment, like that was the moment that kind of defined the series. Not just that moment, but just that was the difference. Winker, if he'd gotten the home run, there would have been more games. There would have been more series. You know what I mean? That was the kind of difference between the Mets and the Dodgers in this one. Otherwise, kind of similar, like trying to piece together a starting rotation. I'd say the Dodgers relievers were better than the Mets relievers.
That was the other thing that really surprised me. Not that we expected the Dodgers bullpen to perform better, but not by that much of a gap. I think that was something that surprised me throughout the playoffs, was that the Mets A bullpen was pretty gettable, and they were known as a team that was doing damage against opposing teams' bullpens too. It seemed like the level of trust that Carlos Mendoza had in a lot of the 6th, 7th inning options was pretty low. Maybe that was a fatigue situation. Maybe it was that these matchups are just more difficult. I don't know what it was exactly, but yeah, 5.56 ERA from Mets relievers so far this postseason. That's just not at all what I would have expected. It's interesting too. You put this chart together to see that the Dodgers are getting so little from their starters, as little as the Guardians have, and we were so concerned about the Guardians needing to have guys go deeper into their starts. Even the innings the Guardians were getting were a lot better than the starting pitcher innings from the Dodgers. A ERA difference of 2 runs in the postseason. But the bigger question I think I have is, you look at the success of a team like the Tigers this year and the way they did it, just keeping it afloat throughout the second half by playing really well and coming up with a strategy with their relievers that just worked perfectly. I wonder if there's a tweak to this strategy, if you can continue down a path like this, where this ends up being more of the sweet spot. And maybe the reason for it is you're not as dependent upon 3 or 4 guys staying healthy when you intend to scatter playoff innings onto 6 or 7 different arms, right? In the old days, when you were leaning heavily on the rotation to gobble up 65 or 75% of playoff innings, you were really vulnerable if 2 out of those 4 starters were not available for the series by the end of the year. So almost in a roundabout way, by necessity, it's like they've stumbled into a strategy that has been pretty effective in an era in which pitchers are breaking at extraordinary rates.
Yeah, I mean, let's put this up again real quick. I just wanted to point out, though, that now that we know that when you see a reliever a third time, it's just like the third time through the order with the starter, third time in the series. I just wonder if the upper reaches of this chart are actually sustainable. I mean, we're talking here about not getting even 4 innings. We're talking more about, 3 1/3, 3 2/3 from your starters. That's what Cleveland, LA, and Detroit have done. And that means you're getting a lot, 5 2/3 out of your relievers. And I think it's really hard to navigate your way through these longer series and not allow people to see your pitchers a third time through, your relievers a third time through the order, as well as your starters, when you're getting so little from your starters. So I am interested in this. The Dodgers are really pushing this, but I will point out that on the top of this list, it's Atlanta, Cleveland, and this is sorted by fewest innings by the starter. Atlanta, that was just, a short series where their starters didn't go deep. But, even on the deeper ones, Cleveland, LA, Detroit, Milwaukee, New York, those are all eliminated,
Yeah.
and to some part due to what I'm talking about, because you throw Hunter Gaddis at Juan Soto for the second or third time, and you get a Juan Soto who in the post-game interview said, even when there was 2 strikes on him, he was like, I am all over this guy. Like, I can see this guy well. So I think that happened in Detroit too, where, the relievers were more effective early in the series. And we also know from separate research from Baseball Prospectus that every pitch a reliever throws over the course of the season makes him worse. So, we've also seen this postseason some of the best relievers of our time get touched up for big homers. Clase was just not good, and he's a dominant reliever. So I do think it's working right now for the Dodgers, but I gave the pitching advantage to the Yankees due to the fact that they had better bulk. And I think the longer a series goes, the better it is to have starters that can at least go 4.
I think the
5.
other, I think I think getting through the heart of the order a second time, as important, as quirky as it seems, like we always want to avoid the heart of the order the third time if we can with guys that don't have great stuff. But I think even for guys that have average stuff, getting through the heart of the order twice reduces the reliever exposure against those elite hitters over the course of the series. I think that's sort of the sweet spot. You're right. Like we used to think in terms of quality starts, or at least going 5. Now I think it's
get through the order
4.
twice, please.
get through the number 4 or number 5 hitter a second time, and then you can use your 5th best reliever against the bottom
of the order,
and you're not really as worried about getting torched there. And then you can play matchups more 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th inning. So I do think that 4 and change is sort of the new sweet spot for the non-aces. If you can get through that frame, then you've done enough to give yourself a chance to win. I mean, I think there's a lot here because the Dodgers clinched with a bullpen game. Another different pattern. They used Michael Kopech off the top, and a former starter, you would say, well, he's probably about as comfortable as any reliever could be starting a game. He didn't look comfortable. He managed to work around a really wild inning to only allow 1 run, but that inning could have gotten away from Kopech, and that could have changed the complexion of the entire game. And then they were able to use Ben Kasparias and Anthony Banda for 4 outs each. That's like the other hack. If you can use the last 2 relievers in your bullpen and burn through more than an inning in a game that you're winning, you've lived a good life, and or you've put together a high quality deep bullpen. And I think maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's like we sometimes underrate how good a team's 6th or 7th reliever might be.
Yeah, I will point out, though, as much as I've rolled out that stat that the Dodgers have 14 or 15 relievers during the regular season that had above average stuff, that wasn't necessarily the case down the stretch. And, Daniel Hudson was actually losing stuff as the season went on, just like, which makes sense given the research I just cited from Baseball Prospectus. But if you're looking at relievers that in September had above average stuff for the Dodgers, you're looking at Kopech, Vesia, Phillips, Gratterall. Is he hurt?
Yeah.
Must be hurt. He's not in here. So if you're looking at healthy ones that are on the roster right now that had above average stuff in September, you're looking at Kopech, Vesia, Phillips, Kasparias, Treinen. That's it. So Brazier was average. Daniel Hudson was below average. Anthony Banda was below average. Brent Honeywell was well below average. So those are the pitchers. Ryan Brazier right at average. Daniel Hudson, Anthony Banda. Those are the pitchers that I kind of just sort of doubt that the Yankees are going to let them off the hook.
Yeah. Well, those are
be the difference.
Absolute crush spots that you need to take advantage of if you get the opportunity. Tommy Edman got the MVP.
Speaking
for
of taking advantage of your opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, and I had this on the rundown, I don't know, maybe a week or so ago. We just didn't quite get to it, but I wondered if we underappreciated the Tommy Edman trade at the time it happened because he'd been sidelined by that wrist injury all season. And it just felt like a more of a lottery ticket than it probably is. I mean,
well, then he also got hurt in the ankle on rehab. It just felt like maybe this is going to be one of those lost years, where he just can't get healthy.
Yeah, and even when you look at the way Tommy Edman contributes, it's more defense first than just being kind of a close to league average player with the stick. But that really works, especially given the problems the Dodgers were having at shortstop, right? It's hard to go trade for a shortstop in season unless it's an all-glove utility guy. And they at least got the good, very good defender, great defender that's actually average with the bat. And I don't know if I appreciated that trade enough when it happened. And I'd be saying this even if he didn't win a series MVP. I think series MVP awards are actually kind of ridiculous in some ways. And I say that as someone who thinks we should have more full season awards. So I just wanted to shift the trophies around.
29 plate appearances.
Yeah, and look, he had a great series and had a great game in the clincher too. So I get it. Like I understand how you have to whittle it down, but the bottom line is like
series, Max Muncy had a WRC plus that was about 100 points higher.
Yeah, I mean that. Yes, and maybe what would be if you had to drill down to one number. We don't like to do this, but if you had to drill down to one number to give away an MVP award for a series, would it be a cumulative win probability added? How much WPA did you have over the series, or did you have the most win probability added in the games your team won? Like how would you try and slice it if you had to rely heavily on one number to determine a player's value in a best of 7 situation?
Well, that's interesting. As a fantasy guy and as a, I like predictive numbers better even when you're assessing talent, because the whole idea is how good is this player now is basically how good is this player now going forward, right? I mean, we're more interested in that than now going backwards, right? That's how I feel. And so WPA would be, says Tommy Edman, that was the right choice above Max Muncy and Shohei Ohtani. But a lot of that's just because he's coming up behind Max Muncy and Shohei Ohtani. I mean, the whole brilliance of what he did was he had a 13.8% strikeout rate, and he didn't walk once. So he was actually this is kind of a lineup diversity thing where he's like Teoscar Hernandez, where you take a bunch of Max Muncy's and people who have more of that kind of approach on a team. And you put different kinds of players around him. And so when Max Muncy gets on base with a 41% walk rate in the championship series, and Shohei Ohtani gets on base with a 29% walk rate, and Mookie Betts gets on base with a 16% walk rate, then it's great to have a guy who has a 0% walk rate right behind them, because at that point you want a hit. You want a ball in play. And that's how he got 11 RBI. That's why he got the best win probability out. And that's why I'm not complaining too much. I'm just pointing out that there were other hitters in this series for the Dodgers that were better.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. It's part of just being on a loaded team. But I do think that lineup diversity part is a big reason why Tommy Edman fit so well for the Dodgers. They didn't need another superstar at shortstop. They needed a great defender who could be.
I don't know if he's a great. I want to push back a little bit. I don't know if he's a great.
Well, he was at one point. He was. He's
right.
Average, but at least better than
now
average.
He's 29 right and had been pushed to the outfield already.
Yeah, but also like not a bad defender at all at a position of need. So I think it's good. I mean, 2 years ago, 2022, he's a plus 12 for DRS. So
right, and they need a center fielder as much as a shortstop, most days. So. Yeah, it's a great trade, and he fits that lineup perfectly. And congratulations, Tim. 407 average, 393 OBP, 630 slugging, 11 RBI. What a great series for Tommy Edman.
Should we say goodbye to the Mets and take a look at their winter for a moment?
Yeah, we should.
All right. So the thing about the Mets in the Steve Cohen era, and I think this is apparent in some of the folks I saw in the Discord, there's actually a lot of optimism right now with the Mets compared to previous iterations of this club that were eliminated in the postseason, where it felt like, well, that's the end of that. We're not going to get back there again. This felt more like the beginning of a long, sustained run where any free agent is in play. We've known that for the time Steve Cohen's been there. With David Stearns at the helm in the front office, they're going to do a lot of things well that probably the Dodgers do, because look at the success they've had in Milwaukee during Stearns' time there. You can have the pitching lab, you can have those philosophies, but then you can also have massive resources on the payroll. That changes everything, right? So, we're going to talk a lot about the Yankees and Dodgers this week. I think the Mets can see themselves in both of those franchises in the not so distant future. That's the goal they're aspiring to. They're trying to become one of those franchises, and with a wide open possibility as far as any player you want, it's much easier to look at this team and say, well, okay, well, Pete Alonso's a free agent. If Pete Alonso leaves the Mets, it's not some devastating blow they're not going to come back from. Like, it's just not.
It'll be because they put the money on Juan Soto instead.
Most likely, right? Or they'll have some reasonably smart plan to bolster the roster in some other way. And I think the more likely outcome is both. They'll keep Alonso and do the big things. So where do you think they begin? I mean, the starting pitching was a relative weak spot already going into this season. Kodai Senga being hurt for most of the season didn't help. And even I felt kind of bad watching him in the NLCS, in the sense that I realized the decision was probably, who's our eighth pitcher? Is it Adam Ottavino or Kodai Senga? The possibility of getting Senga at 80% effectiveness was enticing enough, probably because of the possibility of bulk versus a short reliever like Ottavino. I understand how they got there. I am not at all criticizing the process. It's more a question of,
it was just sad to watch Kodai not be, legit Kodai.
Yeah, because we know he's good when he's healthy. That was the part that was frustrating, right? But you have Senga. You have young guy, Brandon Sproat, like a huge step in the minors this year. You have a ballpark that enhances stuff and plays pitcher friendly in general. So you also have in your back pocket, aside from all the money you could spend to lure
in
big
New York,
free agents,
and you just did well in the postseason. So you are a destination where people want to go.
You could be the team that signs Corbin Burns. There's no reason why it couldn't be the Mets. That's in the cards possibly too.
I think the difficulty is they should get Corbin Burns, but they also need many more. The nice thing is they go from a luxury tax payroll of 358 to, and I don't think Manaea's opting in, so they have 160 million luxury tax right now on next year. So they could spend $200 million next year in terms of AAV. I'm not even talking about long term, right? But the thing is, in terms of what starters you want to put in their rotation right now, you have Tyler McGill and Kodai Senga, and that's it. Everybody else is a free agent.
Yeah, Severino was a one-year deal. Manaea can opt out, and we assume will opt out after the strong finish he had of the year. Had a good season overall, and you could always re-up any of those guys. But the thing that
you have very little in there. I mean, you have two guys. That's my point. Is you have two guys in there, so you have to be shopping not only in the top of the market, but in terms of the back of the market. Like if Merrill Kelly or Alex Cobb will take a 1-year deal, you're interested. If Martin Perez will take a 1-year deal and give you kind of, maybe you think we can get another Jose Quintana type season out of Martin Perez. You're checking with your pitching coaches and your pitching team, and you're saying, can we coax a full season out of Michael Lorenzen? Can we sign Spencer Turnbull to like an injury incentive laden contract? They're gonna have to be active all the way down to Brandon Bielak or whatever. They have to be everywhere in this pitching market, top, middle, and bottom.
But the conditions are such that they have the money to do it. So when you're trying to bid against 10 other teams that are all trying to cling to every dollar, and you have the Steve Cohen budget, you can top all those offers. You can give 14 million when other teams are offering 11, right? You can do that. Or you can do the deal like they did with Minaya. You can give 2 years with an opt-out. That's going to be enticing to a lot of guys. So you've got a pitcher-friendly environment, a team on the rise, one that actually is pretty good defensively too. So it's actually a great spot to go on a short-term deal right now. So that's another little bonus for the Mets, who aren't going. We're going to look at them in a few years and go, wow, they don't really need any help because they've built a great organization top to bottom. That's my current trajectory, my current assumption about them. But in the meantime, they can do almost anything they need to do to keep making the roster better. So they look like a team that's going to be a perennial contender. If you said, how many of the next 5 postseasons are the Mets going to play in? And I set the over-under at 3.5. Are you above 3.5? Or are you below 3.5 postseasons out of the next 5 years for this Mets franchise?
I guess a little, maybe below. One thing that does make me a little nervous is when you have to revamp a full pitching staff like this in free agency. Yes, you have some guys coming up that you're excited about, but some of them are hurt. How much can you depend on them? How much will they translate? You're also asking for, if you have to sign 4 starters for your starting rotation, and 2 or 3 of those are going to be kind of bounce back pillow, somebody you like that you think you can coax stuff out of. You have to have a really good hit rate on all that. You know what I mean? And they did this year, so maybe they can redo that. But we've seen other places be like, oh, they have the magic. If you go there, you bounce back. I think we felt this way about the Dodgers. And then you were like, oh, wait, Andrew Heaney signed back with them and wasn't that great. You know what I mean? Like, it's hard to keep hitting every year on these bounce backs and keep being brilliant. You know what I mean? That's one thing that they've shown a little bit of, but have they shown that it's going to be sustainable and that they're doing this year after year? I'm not sure that they've done that just yet. And then the position player prospect clue, as much as I love Mark Vientos, Brett Brady took a real step backwards. I'm not sure that Acuna is a hitter. And somebody like a Starling Marte next year is a DH for them. Jeff McNeil is older. As much as I think Lindor is a good defender, Brandon Nimmo, used to be a good defender. They're all getting older, so this has a potential to not be a great defensive team, especially with Mark Vientos' problem. So if you have Mark Vientos, who should be a first baseman or DH, and you have Starling Marte, who at this point should probably be a DH. You have Brandon Nimmo heading there. If you spend a bunch of money on Juan Soto, who might be heading towards the DH, there might be a point at which this is not a good defensive team, and that starts to impact their ability to get these bounce back starters. So I'm gonna take the under, but it's also a difficult division. You've got other things going on in that division.
All right, so Eno's a little less optimistic than I am by comparison on the Mets. I'd be tempted to take the over on 3.5. I think they're going to be a perennial playoff club. I don't think they have to get Juan Soto in free agency to do it, by the way, because I'm not sure Juan Soto gets out of the Bronx. I don't think Brian Cashman and Hal Steinbrenner are going to let that happen. I want to talk about the ALCS, though, for a bit. I think we hit the point after the Yankees opened that 2-0 lead. We wondered, is this even going to be more than a sweep? It only went 5, but the games were fun. Like I enjoyed this series, which is not always the case for series that end this way. I think we just saw over the course of the series the very thing you were mentioning earlier, where when you start to see even the elite relievers that third time, especially for a top end lineup, that's when you're going to start to do damage. Game 4 was when the Yankees finally broke through against Cade Smith. They got him, right?
Cade Smith was so good this year. I mean, the model numbers loved him. The results loved him. He was dominant all year. The eye test was great, and he was great in this up until, getting 1 out and giving up 3 runs on Friday night.
Yeah, so Giancarlo Stanton got him. I thought this was a pretty unusual sequence. They were trying to get him with high fastballs, and it was on a night when Smith was down about 2 ticks. He was averaging 94 on the fastball instead of 96. when you've lost 2 ticks on your fastball, and that's the game plan, I feel like you need that last minute wrinkle. You need some kind of plan. And so he gets a called strike. It's a swinging strike, misses high, and then goes right back to the spot. I think it was of the called strike, and Stanton hammered it. And I just thought, man, after that take on the high pitch to make it 1-2, maybe that was the great time to just try to bury a splitter. Change the eye level, change the timing, and at least if you're going back to the fastball after that, like you've got something, you've at least tried something a little different.
He threw 3 straight fastballs. No, not 3 straight. 3 out of 4 fastballs were high and away. Mm-hmm. He was going to the same spot. And you know, even if you were throwing 96, it seems aggressive to throw a good hitter the same pitch over and over again.
He's going to catch up to that. Like, that's just part of what Stanton does. Like, you let him see it enough times, he's going to catch up and hit it.
Is he even bad there? Because he has such a opposite field approach with a kind of a flat path. Like, it doesn't seem to be. I'm checking the heat maps right now for where his slugging was this year. And I guess he's got a hole high and away, but he doesn't really have a hole high middle. So you're kind of, you know what I mean? Like you're looking at a fine hole there. Like you're really trying to thread the needle.
Well, and I think if you're living in that part of the strike zone for the entire at bat, I feel like maybe you're taking that hole, that blue shade, and you're neutralizing that quite a bit against yourself.
You're letting him anticipating it. There. You could maybe even be inching towards the plate if your catcher's not catching. If the catcher's not paying attention, you know, he could be getting a little bit closer to the plate, you know, physically. So there's a lot of things he can do. He has a little bit of a hole down and in. So, you know, just throwing a slider to, you know, down and in, or throwing his splitter down and in could have, you know, given Stanton a little bit of like, oh crap. Got it on in too.
I definitely had some vibes late in this game. The Guardians erased a 6-2 deficit. They put up 3 runs in the 7th of game 4. They tied it the inning after. And then the Yankees got Class A again. I was like, okay. Like at that point, that's sort of the swing again in the pendulum where you're like, this isn't going to happen for the Guardians. If Class A gets through that outing clean,
felt it, yeah.
That's when you keep that buzz alive. But it's like, man, they got him again. And this has been such a strange postseason for Emmanuel Clase. 8 innings, 12 hits, 3 earned, 3 homers. Just, I don't even know how to explain it beyond the teams got to see him on repeat a little bit. And even like, okay, so Kerry Carpenter got him for that homer in the DS. The Tigers are in division, so maybe there's a little bit of decay just from, hey, it's an in-division reliever we've seen a few times. Like maybe there's some of that too. But of all the things to go wrong for Cleveland, Emmanuel Clase not being nails for them in the spots where he had to be is such a cruel twist of fate. Like to have that puncher's chance to pull that upset, that was the thing they needed to go right. And of all the things to go wrong, it was that. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I think that I'm not sure that Clase was that much worse than usual, or and luck is a weird word to use. It's like he didn't pitch amazingly, and he gave up hits, and even the XBAs on the hits are not super low. But and he even gave up a homer. I don't know. I feel like sometimes I tell my kids in another universe, you know, these things are different. You know, they're like, oh yeah, we know all about the multiverse. Dad. I just feel like you could re-rack that, and Clase could throw the same pitches in different orders in slightly different locations and have been fine. I wasn't watching him like this guy is terrible all of a sudden. You know what I mean?
No, they're and maybe Guardians fans have a sequence where they're like, nah, he did something just as bad as what Cade Smith did against Giancarlo Stanton. No, I think the Cade Smith, Giancarlo Stanton at bat we were talking about a little while ago, that was bad process. I'm not sure there was bad process in what Clase was trying to do. I mean, the homer that Judge hit in game 3, that was just a stupid Aaron Judge homer. How many guys can even do what Judge
Wasn't
did?
It like 3 or 4
pitch?
inches above that strike zone?
I mean, it was like 3 or 4 inches above the wall at its highest point. Like it was just a smoked opposite field line drive that got into the bleachers. It was just like a stupid human trick, basically.
Yeah, and it is funny how we have these different perceptions of things. So Tanner Bybee is throwing to Giancarlo Stanton in game
5.
6? 5?
Yeah.
Not the
it was
Friday
just game 5. Yeah, it was the game. It was the elimination game. But Bybee had a forgotten performance, by the way. He gives them the 5 2/3, the 5 Ks and 2 earned. That's exactly what you need from Tanner Bybee in that spot to give yourself a chance.
So Tanner Bybee is coming up against Giancarlo Stanton for the third time he's seeing him, I think. And he's throwing him sliders away and change-ups, and he's not throwing him anything hard. And he's actually gotten him to a 3-2 count. I saw some people say he hung that slider. Well, and they say, that's a middle slider. First of all, I don't think that's middle, but if you want to give that middle, that's fine. And then they said, he missed the target by 3 feet. I disagree. The target was blown away, and he threw it like low and in the zone, right? So I would say he missed the target by about a foot, which is average. So
people were exaggerating. Is that what you're saying?
I don't know. I mean, they were just saying, I think there was like a consensus that this was like a terrible pitch, and it was all his fault, and he missed his target by 3 feet, and it was middle. It was a hanging slider. And in terms of movement, it had more drop than any of the sliders that he'd thrown in that at bat, and more sideways movement. So it was not a hanging slider in terms of movement. He threw it 82.6, so he was trying to throw like a curvier slider and less of a hard slider. But there was nothing about that was necessarily hanging. In terms of missing his target, I think it was about average missing his target. I don't think it was bad process either. A lot of people said put up 4 fingers and pitch to Jazz. Well, Tom Tango looked at the numbers, and he basically said that if you want to walk a guy in that position, so you're walking Giancarlo Stanton to pitch to Jazz Chisholm in that moment, you have to think that Giancarlo Stanton is 80 points of WOBA better than Jazz Chisholm, right? And in terms of this year, 330 for Giancarlo. In terms of the postseason, 470. And then that's WOBAs. For Jazz Chisholm, WOBA on the year was 330, and then in the postseason, 218. But we're talking about such small samples. Yeah. It's like, that's why we're yelling past each other sometimes, and that's why I didn't engage, because I was just like, okay, I don't think it was the right move to walk him and go to Jazz, because I think that true talent, they're very similar. They do different things, but they're very similar in terms of they're both around 330 WOBA. So you would never walk a 330 WOBA to get a 330 WOBA to the plate with more runners on. You know what I mean? Like you wouldn't do that. So they weren't trying to throw him a pitch that was in the zone. There was a mistake, and Giancarlo pounced on it. I think that Bybee did a little bit of smiling afterwards. It was kind of I read it as like, oh man, Stanton's so good. Well,
yeah, I mean, because if you look at the map of where those pitches were, nothing would have been a called strike up to that last pitch. Nothing. Yeah. He wasn't in the zone at all. Like he had one very close pitch, the changeup. You got to swing a strike. So
Bybee's like, I gave you one friggin' pitch in the zone. It was a slider. It wasn't even a hanger, and you took it out.
Yeah, if there's a process question here, and I know you've been critical of Tanner Bybee's fastball as being kind of a dead zone fastball, not necessarily being something that you can throw even effectively high in the zone without getting hammered.
It's the reverse of Cade Smith. Maybe you should have thrown one high fastball away,
That's the only thing I'm second guessing. There's probably some reason they didn't. And the only reason I think that is because even though he mixed 3 different pitches in that sequence, the slider, the change, and the curveball, everything was within about 3 miles per hour. So you just didn't have anything to disrupt timing for Stanton. That's the only thing I'm looking at and going, maybe if you could do it again, you're working a high fastball into that count, somewhere in that count. Probably after he took the slider, maybe like right around pitch 4. That's somewhere in that range. In the middle, maybe you try to just blow a high fastball up there.
Tanner Bibee did not throw Giancarlo Stanton a single four-seamer in that game. And the only fastballs he threw were in the first at-bat, were 3 sinkers in on his hands. So
maybe he felt like he'd already used that and it wasn't going to work again.
Yeah, he was a little afraid of throwing the fastball to Giancarlo Stanton.
And maybe for good reason, but nevertheless.
Gave up the homer on a slider then.
So the thing everybody was talking about in Game 5 was the sequence Hunter Gaddis against Juan Soto, right? I mean, this has been thought about and broken down many, many times over. And it was slider, 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 changeup, slider. And then he did the thing that DVR always wants. He's like, well, finally throw him a four-seamer. And he did it, and Soto hammered it. And I guess the question would be here, it's like, what went
Gaddis
wrong
did
for
the thing
Hunter
we
Gaddis?
wanted the other two guys to do, right?
Yeah, and it's like, well, this is like pitching to the Yankees is hard, nerds. Like, what do you?
Oh my God! I mean, Brent Rooker was saying that this was like one of the best at bats he's ever seen, and it was just amazing. And like I said before, Juan Soto, it's kind of amazing to go 6 pitches in and be in a 1-2 count and have been there for 6 pitches, basically, just like fouling. And they asked him afterwards, what were you thinking? He said, I'm all over this guy. So I guess that's where the fouling is. He's just missing. He feels like he can foul off anything, and this guy's got to come in the zone and got to come to him, and he's got him. So, I think that was a kind of a cool moment because he wasn't afraid to being arrogant and sounding arrogant, and he gave us a little viewpoint of what it's like to have a plus approach, which is confidence plus, this ability, this bat to ball ability to foul these off, but still the bat speed when he got a 95-mile-an-hour fastball to turn it around the way he did. So really just an excellent combination of bat to ball, bat speed, and approach, I think, just really come together, and Hunter Gaddis was screwed.
What I wonder about, too, is when you do it this way, the 3 sliders, the 2 changeups, back to the slider, then to the four-seamer that turns into a home run. When you start to think about that sequence, was the fastball something that Soto was just waiting for the entire time? Like, was he just trying to keep everything alive? Because he's like, once I get the fastball, I'm hammering the fastball.
I think so. I think he's got a fastball swing on it, and as soon as he sees it's not a fastball, he's kind of relaxing his hands and fouling it off. Like
I wonder if you could read the way he was fouling some of those pitches off too. If as a pitcher, you're like, the timing on these foul balls is such that maybe this is maybe there's some clue you can try to get against some hitters that works, but it just doesn't work against Soto.
Yeah, I mean, he could be toggling. He could be sitting back and forth, slider and fastball, and fouling them for different reasons. Because generally you're like, oh, if he fouls it this way, he's early on it, and so he's taking a fastball swing. He fouls it this way, he's late on it, meaning that was just like a protect swing, right? With 2 strikes, it could be some of them were protect swings. I don't remember now exactly where all the foul balls went.
The kicker here too, though, is like, you get the inning from Class A that you need earlier in this game, and then you've used Class A, so your other relievers have to finish it off against the toughest hitters in the Yankees lineup, and then it breaks down against them, right? It's such a miserably difficult lineup to navigate right now with a few guys running really hot, and it's not just Judge and Stanton. And I think it's cool to see Giancarlo Stanton have some big moments on this stage, because I feel like his time with the Yankees has been somewhat marred by injuries, not as bad as some people make it out to be. And knowing that he's not the same player he was at his peak, like no one is at this age. Like usually you're going to show signs of decay in your mid 30s. He's 34 now, but I think it's weird to me that Stanton got the series MVP because I feel like Soto, if it was remotely close, Soto's game-winning homer off of Gaddis probably should have earned that trophy in one swing.
And in terms of win probability added, to revisit our the way we looked at it last time, Soto was clearly ahead of Stanton, had the most win probability added in either CS. And in terms of, like WOBA, Soto was second only to Muncy. So he had 3 homers, 368, 478, 895 slugging. I mean, he had a higher slugging percentage than Stanton did, and obviously a higher average in OBP. So I think there's some of this was kind of like vibes and just like wanting to. He's not the captain like D. Jeter or anything, but like wanting to give it to a guy who'd been here for a long time, and was a true Yankee with capital letters. I feel like I wonder if it, to some extent they're like, Soto, you're going to be here again and you're going to win one,
Yeah, right. Yeah, you're gonna win this trophy at some other point in your career. Let's give this one to Stanton because this probably won't happen for him again. That's fair.
I feel like he's 34. Yeah. Stanton's not. I don't know if he's going to make it to the end of his contract. I mean, 2027. There could be a DFA for him at the very end, but it's just amazing to me how hard he still hits the ball. Like to continue to hit the ball 120 miles an hour at 34 years old is just amazing to me.
Yeah, still has the raw power just off the charts, which is a big part of what makes him so dangerous, even at this stage of his career. That matchup, that Soto-Gaddis matchup, also was really only possible because of an inning extending error at second base from Brian Rocchio.
Which is,
that's brutal.
It is brutal too because he's in there for defense. He was a good defender, and he was such a bad bat that if he's not going to be a great defender, it almost starts to question like his job for next year. You know what I mean? Like you don't want to say that about a couple errors because it wasn't just one, but it does put pressure on him to start to perform better with the bat or to prove that was just some weird stuff that happened in the postseason. You know what I mean? And it could totally be, but I'm just saying with a bat this bad, you need to be a great defender, and he may not be the shortstop all year for the Guardian next year, even though I don't know necessarily who's going to take the job from him.
Right. He might be more of a utility infielder for them going forward, not because of that play, but because he's just not hitting enough to be in the regular
interaction. Well, I think the play might have something to do. It's like the interaction between what that play means about his defense and how bad his bat has been. Yeah.
We did see Luke Weaver on for 2 innings to close out Game 5, and we saw a few cutters, so the wrinkle is in place. I think that'll be important as they use him pretty heavily, I imagine, in the World Series matchup against the Dodgers. It's only a matter of time before that cutter was going to be dusted off by Luke Weaver. The big question now, though, much different than our conversation about the Mets, what's on tap for the Guardians this offseason? When you go from the team that has basically no budget and seemingly unlimited resources to one that's been very effective for a long time, despite running low payrolls, because traditionally they've done a phenomenal job developing pitching. They've done a good job finding middle infielders that have turned into superstars. That's been part of the hack for them as well. And you think about them in the context of an improving AL Central. No matter where you stand on the Tigers in 25 and the Royals in 25, they're much better today than they were a year ago, and they're going to continue pushing chips in to get better for next season. So I do think the division's going to be a little bit harder again next year than it already was this year. What do you think the moves are going to look like for the Guardians? They got a couple guys who are in ARB 3, final arbitration season, including Josh Naylor. And one thing I was thinking about with their roster was because David Fry was hurt, as we learned, and couldn't play defense, and they were platooning the DH spot, they were really kind of hamstrung Like some of the substitutions, right? And Stephen Vogt did as good of a job with this roster over the course of the season, I think, as you could ask a manager to do. Great first-time manager.
Whenever you see like a pinch hitter for somebody and then somebody playing defense for that pinch hitter, you know that something like this is going on.
Burning 2 players to pinch hit is not what you want to do, right? That's just not optimal roster construction. So Josh Naylor is a good player coming off of a very good regular season, didn't come through with much in the postseason, unfortunately. So I think that ending is going to change the way a lot of people look at what was a career year for him at the plate. 31 homers this year, continued to show us a pretty nice barrel rate, right in the 8% range, doesn't strike out a lot, really more of a DH than a first baseman, ideally. So how do they make the pieces fit? Do you want final arb Josh Naylor if you're the Guardians and you operate on such a tight payroll budget, and you've got Kyle Manzardo coming up as someone who looks like he's ready to take on a larger role? I mean, looked like a different player in the second half, came through with a couple of big swings in the postseason as well. It was nice to see after talking to Kyle at the Fall League last year on the pod. So like, what's the main thing? What's the biggest move you could see this Guardians team actually making this winter that gives them a shot to stay atop the AL Central and make another run in 2025?
I mean, I think a very Guardians move would be to trade Josh Naylor. That would fit what they've done in the past. You know, they're a team that always wants to be a year ahead of whatever the roster crunch is. They're a team that will trade a prospect. I guess the Rays are a little bit more a team that'll trade a prospect, but they're a team that won't let anything go until they have to. You know, they're a collecting assets kind of team. And Josh Naylor being a free agent after the 2025 season, if he leaves without them, you know, sort of getting anything for him, I think they will think that is a loss. However, you know, the way that I see this is they spent $140 million by the luxury tax payroll estimate on Fangraphs last year. They have 104 under contract for this year. They also just made $25 to $30 million in the postseason. You know, with that postseason run, I think it'd be a really cool idea to extend Josh Naylor because this team needs hitting, and he's one of their hitters. I know he didn't do great in the postseason, but I would give him money. And I don't think, you know, with his body, with his age, with his production, I don't think you're talking about anything close to like a Pete Alonso or, you know, like it's not. You could maybe do this for an affordable, smaller number the way you just did Jose Ramirez. And I think it might make sense to do so, to lock in a guy like that. And it wouldn't cost anything for 2025, but it would lock you into maybe a longer window. And then I think what they have to do, which they have almost never done, is buy some starting pitching. And I do think that with $30 million, you could go find some starting pitching. That'll take the pressure off of those relievers the next time you get to the postseason. I don't know that they're ever going to be a player that gets out there and drops $30 million on a free agent hitter.
No, it
that would
never
be a great idea for them, I think.
Like that. Yeah.
But I just don't think it's something that they think makes sense for them.
Well, and there's a couple things that, you know, could help, but Travis Bazzana, maybe he's a very fast mover to the system. There's one potential impact bat, the guy you just drafted first overall in July. Like maybe by the end of 2025, he's already contributing to your lineup. That would help. We'll see. Healthy Chase DeLauder is still more of something I want to see. I don't think you could even really put much of a grade on what happened to him in 2024 from a performance perspective, because he played all of, I think, 37 games between AA and AAA around all the foot trouble that he was dealing with. So I would probably pull a little back and say, okay, he looked pretty darn good out of 23. I'm still excited about DeLauder as long as that foot is not a massive long-term problem. So you got a couple of guys that are close. That helps. I imagine we're going to see both of those guys by the end of 2025, health permitting. And then if you add one bat, or maybe you just keep Lane Thomas. Lane Thomas is the other ARB3 guy that you could kind of see like, oh yeah, past Guardians decisions might make you think he'll get flipped again. Get a nice postseason, kind of gives them some things they need. I could see them deciding to ride it out with Thomas for at least the first part of the year. And if they're not where they want to be at the deadline, then maybe they trade him at the deadline or something too. I think that's part of the slightly higher variance way that the Guardians go about things. Shane Bieber comes off the books. They already had to navigate a season without him because of injury. So that maybe covers your salary bumps for both Naylor and Thomas without even adding anything to the payroll.
Yeah. I think they're set to where they could do very little and they lose very little and they could re-rack and be a very similar team. But I just itching to help them be better, just itching to get them to the World Series. And I think that requires a little bit more in terms of some arms. If there is a bat that's kind of intriguing for you that might fit, that does do something for them, especially in lieu of our last conversation. Ha-Seong Kim?
Okay, that's kind of interesting.
That's not a top of the market name, but great shortstop that makes contact. Going to be a better offensive player than Brian Rocchio. I don't know.
It's hard to do a lot more at that position in free agency. And as far as, how does the bat grade out? It's been league average for the last 3 seasons, even a shade above for Kim. So I can see that kind of fits their philosophy.
If people nervous about the shoulder or whatever, maybe you can just jump in there and be like, well, with Rocchio, we have a pretty good backup plan.
Do a 2-year deal or one with a big option and see how it goes.
I just can't imagine that Ha-Seong Kim is going to come off of shoulder surgery and hit the market and get 5 and 60, like 5 and 100, whatever. What are you going to give a guy with a shoulder surgery? It's like labrum surgery. You don't know what his power is going to be. You don't know what his bat speed is going to be.
Kim just turned 29 though, so he's maybe
he's 29. Is he how long is he going to play short? And he was never a premium bat speed guy. So I think there's enough questions where you might be able to jump in and get a player that makes sense for your team.
All right, so you're living in that bucket as far as your most exciting possible position player add. And then because they're a team that will trade players as they approach free agency, I could leave that door open as a possibility for them to maybe get 1 or 2 controllable players back for someone who's a little bit closer to their walk year.
But Bazana is getting closer. The other thing I would consider that's kind of interesting maybe is Andres Gimenez to short.
Yeah.
He had elite defensive numbers at second.
Yeah, and there's a few teams that are in the situation like this. I mean, the Brewers with Willie Adames is a free agent this winter. Maybe Bryce Terang's a shortstop again next year. Or maybe Joey Ortiz moves over. And Andres Gimenez would be in that bucket as someone you'd at least have to think about. It's a little more of a floor at the plate than we've seen from Rocchio. We saw the ceiling year probably back in 2022. I don't think you're ever going to pencil a 141 WRC plus in for Andres Gimenez. But if they could just get him back to the Ha-Seong Kim overall value level at the plate, that would be huge for them. I don't think that's impossible. So that might be your reason to not sign Kim, is that Gimenez could play short potentially, and you're not worried about the shoulder, and you can do some other things at second base with Bazana once he's ready.
Yeah, I mean, I think Bazana's going to be on a fast track. People can look at the 238 average for Bazana, but I think they'd be missing the picture. It was a plus walk rate, a manageable strikeout rate, good power, good speed. He was 26% better than league average at his first attempt in the minor leagues at 21 in high A. So I think everything is still on track for him to be an impact player. And I think you'd be seeing some AA from him. And as soon as you see AA from a player, I feel like they're right on the doorstep for the pros.
On the radar once that happens. We got a few great shows lined up over the course of the week. If you haven't done so already, join the Discord. The link is in the show description. We should have Britt back on Tuesday, Trevor May back on Wednesday. I think we're going to try to squeeze in some kind of draft of World Series players as we move through the week as well. If you got some questions about this series or some other off-season things.
Week of anticipation.
It's too many days off. We'll talk about that at some point this week as well. But if you got questions for us, send them in the mailbag channel on the Discord, or you could email us, ratesandbarrels@gmail.com. We'll also get that question to us. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you on Tuesday.
Thanks for listening.